This is Dan Duncan, Vice President for Impact Strategies at Community Technology, a company that offers online software for nonprofits to help them drive their mission-based work, and for funders to help them manage their grant application and grant review and outcomes reporting. And I'm going to be talking today about needs assessments. Do they really tell you what you need to know? And I'm going to talk about some alternative strategies instead of needs assessments to drive your work. And just to let you know, for those that don't know me, I spent about 30 years as a United Way professional doing this work. In addition, for about almost 20 years, I've been an adjunct faculty member of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at Northwestern University. So what I'm going to talk about today is really based on my experience as a United Way professional, focusing on community impact as a funder as well, and also my work in neighborhood development and community development. So that's really what's kind of driven my suggestions or thoughts today. I also want to let you know that the reason we're doing this topic, I've been doing a number of webinars over the last couple of months, and this was a topic that was suggested by a couple of the participants in a webinar a couple months ago, and so I'm glad I'm able to address this issue as we go forward. So again, I'll give you a number of opportunities to ask questions and tell your own stories during this process, but I think we're off to a good start. So again, thank you all for joining us. So the presentation objectives, what I'm going to talk about today is why needs assessments can be counterproductive from my perspective, the difference between needs assessments and community assessments, the power of asset mapping, another way of looking at it, and how to unlock community resources for greater results, and a little bit on tracking assets and results and how can we do that as a funder. So to get started, I want to do a poll here just to find out who is on the call with this, because we do have foundations and United Ways on the call, I believe. So let's go ahead and find out who is on the call today or on the webinar. Are you representing a United Way, a community foundation, or some other type of an organization? So I'll give you just a few minutes to vote.
Sharana Kildun with the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation.
All right, well, welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. All right, so give just folks another couple seconds to vote, and now we'll close this poll and show you the results. So as you can see, about 30% are community foundations, 67% are United Ways, and 4% others. So thank you very much for doing that. The other question we have, as you can see, is kind of where is your organization on the outcomes tracking or the community impact results, wherever that may be. Are you just starting in the murky middle or on track but want to fine-tune our efforts? Because what we're aware of is that United Ways and community foundations are all in a process of transforming and changing their work. All right, so it looks like about almost everybody has voted. So we'll give 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and close the poll, and here are the results. So you can see about 22% are just starting, 41% are in the murky middle, as I call it, and another 37% are on track but wanting to improve. So that kind of helps me know how to kind of target our webinar today as we move forward. So thank you very much. Why needs assessments can be counterproductive. If we start with an assumption around our goal, which is to create significant measurable community change, and I think that's what funders want to do today, is really demonstrate that they can create significant community change. And I think there's some assumptions for creating community change that I've learned from my experience and from the readings and from really the state of the art. Number one is that it takes a wide variety of strategies and activities to achieve community change. There's no one magic bullet, there's no one solution. It takes a whole host of the community, from community residents to agencies to government, businesses, to be involved to create real community change. To achieve real impact requires the community and its residents to be involved. Most of the successful solutions across this country have a role for people to play, for the residents themselves, the clients of our services, if you will, for them to be involved in the process. The third assumption is that communities have an abundance of resources. The issue is that they've not been identified and engaged. So that any of our activities that we do ought to be based on how can we identify more of the resources or the assets that we have in our community, and how can we become and get them engaged. And fourth, all of our activities should be directed at increasing and not stifling community engagement. So we want to be careful we're not doing anything that gets in the way of increased community engagement into the solution or the strategy that we're trying to do. I think there's also some assumptions from my experience about needs assessments. The first one is we already have more data than we can use effectively. We already have data. We have the census data. We have a whole host of things, and particularly if you're in a community, if you're a professional or a resident of a community, you really know what the issues are. You know what the information is. So the issue is not that we need more data, because we have a significant amount of data. The issue is it's not totally sufficient, and so we have to utilize. And then the second question is, or the assumption is, you cannot use data alone to decide if one issue is more important than another. There are a lot more factors that go into that to clearly do that. The third is the barrier to change is not a lack of data, but a lack of leadership and engagement. If you look at why we're not making changes or not creating change, it isn't because we don't have enough data. It's because the lack of leadership and engagement on the issue that's really bringing the community together. So needs assessments do not create leadership or engagement. They actually, as I'll talk about a little from my perspective, they actually get in the way of that. Just to remind you, you all will get a copy of this PowerPoint after the webinar, and you'll also again get a link to the recorded version of this as well. So moving forward, one of the reasons that this is so important is John McKnight from the ABCD Institute at Northwestern University gave a speech a couple of years ago in Nova Scotia, where he was talking about why we need to engage the community, and his framework was around that really the issue of neighborhood engagement, of people being involved, of community residents getting involved is critical. It's not just the icing on the cake. It is a key ingredient if we're going to be successful, because institutions can't do everything. So we need the community to be part of the solution. And part of the reason for that is that if you think about it, what only individuals can do? Are there things that only people can do and institutions or agencies and programs and services can't fully do? There are a number of things. The first one is a primary source of our health. According to the World Health Organization, if you think about the determinants of health, what makes people healthy, there are a couple key things. The first one is personal behavior, personal choices, whether somebody exercises, whether they eat right, whether they drink too much, or whatever that may be. So personal choices are the largest indicator of whether somebody is going to be healthy or not. And those are about what people can do. The second is social relationships. People that tend to have social relationships and are not isolated are healthier than people, again, that are isolated. So social relationships are a key ingredient to whether somebody is healthy. That's why seniors, when they become isolated, they tend to have more health problems. The third one is the physical environment. If somebody is homeless, they're certainly going to be at risk of health issues. If they live next to a toxic waste area. And so those are issues where people have a role. And then finally, fourth is economic status. Clearly, if you don't have enough revenue or enough income, you are more at risk for health issues, primarily because you can't make some of the good personal choices that you would like to make, or you may be homeless. And the final one is access to health care. And we spend most of our time talking about access to health care, but that does not create health for people. That really, again, is more critical if somebody has cancer, if they have an issue, because that system is really about the sick care system, if you will, not the health care system in some extent. So if we're going to create healthier communities, healthy individuals, it's important that we first focus on what people can do in that arena. The other one is safety and security. There's ample evidence from the research that neighborhoods that are connected, that have strong social capital, social efficacy, people are connected, the crime rate is reduced. They are safer in those neighborhoods. So block watches do make a difference because the police come in many cases too late. Just to give you a quick example, a story, there was a woman that came home one day in her house, opened her door, and when she opened the door, she realized that everything had been stolen. Everything was out of her house, including her dog. This is a true story. And so she called the police, and they came, but of course too late. And the police went next door and interviewed her neighbor and said, "Did you see anything suspicious?" And the neighbor said, "No, I didn't see anything suspicious. All I saw was this big white moving van come up to her house and unload all of her belongings into the moving van and leave." And because I had never met her, we didn't have a relationship, I didn't know the woman, I just assumed she was moving. So the simple act of a relationship, if they would have known each other, the chances are he would have known she wasn't moving, he would have known she was being ripped off, and he could have called the police, and they may have come before it was too late. So safety and security is critical. Future of our Earth, the environment, there's a role that people can play there. Building a resilient economy, there's a role that people play. It can't be just the big institutions. People have to have a role in that. And also raising our children. I think we would all agree that it takes, again, a village, as we've heard, but it takes neighbors, family, friends, everybody involved in the life of a child to make sure that they have a great start to their life. So there's a role for people to play. And so how we tie this together is that we believe that people provide care, and institutions, agencies, programs, and services provide service. And we need both care and service if we're going to be successful in achieving some of our community-based goals. So the community building approach is very clear: to help kids be safe and successful, children do well when their families do well, and families do better when they live in supportive neighborhoods and communities. So it's important that we find ways to engage our community if we're going to achieve the goals. For most United Ways, it's around education, income, and health. For community foundations and others, it's other issues. But the community has a role. So all of our activities should be geared towards increasing and improving not only the programs and services that we have, but also the engagement of the community. So what does engage the community mean? It doesn't mean based on an opinion poll. We don't do an opinion poll and find out that, okay, 67% think this issue is important, so we're going to do this issue. And it's not about organizing the community to care about your agenda. So we've got to convince people that this issue is important. What it's about is identifying the individuals that already care about the issue, your agenda, and mobilizing their action. In the community, there are plenty of people that care about education, that care about income, that care about health, that care about other issues. All we have to do is find them and get them involved in the process, because there are issues to work on, there are plenty of issues, and so that's, from my perspective, the goal that we want to approach. So with that, let me jump into the difference between needs assessments and community assessments. This is a typical community map doing a needs assessment. So we go and really we highlight the number of people who have child abuse, teen mothers, gangs, school dropouts, homeless, all of those issues that we all know that we as human services try to address. And the fact is, we already knew this. We didn't have to do a study in any community, in any neighborhood. The fact is, all of these issues occur in every area, in every community, whether it's a rich neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, they have some level of all of this in their community. And the problem is when you focus on just this piece of the needs map of trying to categorize the scars, if you will, it has some consequences that don't help us in the process. So the first one is that it internalizes the deficiencies identified by the local residents. So they begin to identify themselves by what they can't do rather than what they can do. Destruction of social capital. If you keep telling me that my neighborhood, my community is so bad, I'm not going to meet my neighbor. I'm going to be afraid, so I'm not going to go outside and do some of those things to create that important social capital that we need to create. It also reinforces the narrow categorical funding flows. We have to have a separate program for all of these with separate categorical programs. And the problem is people's lives don't usually occur like that. If somebody has one of these issues, they typically have 2 or 3 of these issues or more. So we need a more collaborative and comprehensive approach to it than just focusing on the individual issues that we can identify. It also, the direction of funds is toward the professional helpers, not the residents. So it makes it very hard for us to really move beyond just services when we're doing a needs assessment. And then it focuses on leaders who magnify deficiencies. If all I'm looking at is the needs, then my job is to make my neighborhood, my community look as bad as it can, because that's how I would get the resources. So it's really the wrong side of the coin for me around that. And then finally, it rewards failure, produces dependency, and creates hopelessness. We've talked to enough people in neighborhoods, and when all they have done is needs assessments, they begin to feel hopeless themselves as they move forward. But there is another side of that neighborhood, that community. It's again not just neighborhoods, but communities. Whatever is the geography you want to approach, and that's the asset map. Because in every neighborhood, in every community, there are individuals that have gifts to give, skills, abilities, whether they're the youth, the seniors, the labeled people. And what we mean by the labeled people are those folks that the alcoholics or the drug abusers, whatever that may be, they also have gifts that they can contribute as part of the solution. Also, we have the citizen associations, like the churches, the block clubs, the athletic groups, cultural groups, where people come together collectively because of their passion. That power can be unleashed, and I'll talk about that a little later. And finally, the local institutions, the agencies, the programs, the services, the parks, the businesses. There's a role they can play to address literally any issue in a community, both by offering service and also offering a whole host of other things that I'm going to talk about a little later. So from our perspective, and my perspective, the consequences of focusing on not only the needs, because we know we're not pretending to be Pollyanna, we know the issues exist, but our focus should be on how do we identify resources that we can utilize to address the issue. So the asset map is a shift in power. People begin to have more power, more ability to do something. It's inclusive. All people have gifts and talents. It's based on relationship building, and it understands that people, not just programs, build power in a community. It's welcoming the stranger, and what we mean by that, everybody has a role. We don't push people aside. It creates a learning community atmosphere. It's place-based, one community, one neighborhood at a time. Again, depending on your area, you may do the whole community, or you may do it one street at a time, one block at a time, whatever works for your local community. And it creates a cooperative orientation rather than a competitive orientation as we move forward. The other way to think about it, if you just focus on the needs assessments, it's about that institutional response, so that to continue to get resources, you have to become even more deficit. So it focuses on the deficit side, or the glass half empty side of the equation, whereas when you do a community assessment, it's focused on asset mapping, community members identifying their own assets, using their assets to take action, leveraging and working with institutions and others, and it creates even more assets and grows the assets in a community rather than limiting them. All right, if not, again, jump in at any point, but let me move on and talk a little bit about the power of asset mapping. And through asset mapping, and I'll explain how to do that and explain some of the concepts, but part of the role we're trying to do is move people from just being consumers of services to the next role, which is advisors of community programs, to becoming producers of community well-being, because we need their resources, their assets, their gifts, as we call them, if we're going to be successful. Because people have really three roles they can play. One is as clients, people as recipients of service, and there's times when everybody has to do that. Whether that's because I'm going to a doctor and I need to be a patient, or I need a service, or I'm in a class and I need the teacher. So it's all appropriate, and there are times when people do need to have that role of being a client as we move forward. But in most cases, when you're a client, the professional knows what they need. It is about clients, it is about dependency, and the agencies and funders are in control, and it's about service, not care. But there are times when service is the appropriate role. The second role is people as advisors, and I think we've all gotten pretty good at this now. People as advisors for institutional action. So at least we're now asking people, what do you need? How would you like to have us deliver the service? What did you like about it? What didn't you? And again, the main question is, what do you need? But it's still about clients and dependency and agencies and funders in control, because it's just informing so that we hopefully can do service better than we were doing it before. And we do want to reach out to people in that role. The third role, though, is people as co-producers of their own and their community's well-being. In this case, we want people to have an opportunity to be producers. So the question changes from what do you need to what can you contribute. So it's about resident engagement. It's about people playing a role. It's about care, not just service. So to give you an example of this, if one of our goals in an education area was to make sure that in a neighborhood or in our community that all families that had kids had 10 age-appropriate books. If that was our key goal, was to make sure that every house had 10 age-appropriate books, our typical response to that would be to write a grant, to raise some money, to fund an agency, to fund a program that is going to go and get books in the houses of neighborhoods and of the kids that have the houses that have kids that need the books. And what I would suggest is that in this community, in every neighborhood, in every community, there are plenty of family members, plenty of parents that would be glad to take on that role if we just asked them. So we don't need to spend a penny in a community to make sure that every house had age-appropriate books. We just have to ask people to get involved and do that, so they can run the book drives, the book exchanges. They can go to Barnes & Nobles and ask for donations of used books or whatever that is. So that's a good example of how do we begin to look at new ways of doing things so that we can create opportunities for people to be producers of their own and their community's well-being. So what is asset mapping? Asset mapping is derived from an approach that refers to a range of approaches that work from the principle that the community can be built by focusing on the strengths and capacity of the citizens and associations that call a neighborhood or community home. So it's not just another name for resources, it's actually a strategy to identify assets that are available from within the community, and it's about opening up and engaging the community in our work as we go forward. And part of the reason is, what are those assets? What are those things that we can identify in a community? And one of the things that John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann did that helped lead to their book, Building Communities from the Inside Out, the Green Book as we call it, was that they did about 30 years of research and identified through that research 5 key ingredients that are active in a community that is healthier than a neighborhood that isn't. They kind of just did observations and identified that in healthier neighborhoods, healthier communities, these 5 things are being utilized effectively, and in others they're not. So the first ingredient starts with people sharing their gifts, being involved, whether that's reading to kids, talking to kids, whether caring for seniors in the neighborhood that are living alone, whatever that is. People are involved and engaged because everybody has something to contribute, some skill, some ability that they can contribute. The second one is the association life, being actively involved in the community or the neighborhood. The largest example of association life is the faith community, but in addition to the faith community, there's sports groups, there's reading clubs, garden clubs, a whole host of groups, the Rotary, Kiwanis, Seroptimist, that can be utilized effectively in a community. Just to give you a quick story, there was a neighborhood we worked with that they noticed the kids were sort of getting in trouble in the neighborhood, so they went to the men's softball league that played softball every Wednesday night, and they asked the men's club or the men's softball league if they would one Wednesday night work with the kids rather than doing their usual softball and going to the bar, if they would work with the kids in the neighborhood and then take them to the Dairy Queen. And that's association, that's men's softball league said, absolutely, we'd be glad to do that. We'll get involved. And the only reason they weren't doing it before is that nobody asked them. So being very purposeful about looking at the association life in a neighborhood, in a community, and getting them involved. The third one is the institutional world, business, government, nonprofits. Having them involved, not only delivering their service or what they offer, but also becoming a treasure chest of other resources that could be used to help build the neighborhood or the community, and I'll talk more about that a little later. And then finally, taking advantage of the environment, using the environment effectively, whatever that may be, whether that's the weather, whether that's a park, whatever that may be. And finally, the time and money exchange, the economy in a neighborhood. Even in a low-income neighborhood, there's typically high density, which means there's still huge buying power if that can be harnessed effectively. That's why, again, the EITC, the VITA programs and the Earned Income Tax Credit program that many United Ways are involved is so important, which brings back literally millions of dollars into low-income neighborhoods that can be utilized to help that neighborhood and those families that live in that neighborhood. So let me give you an example again of how a story from a neighborhood in Mesa, Arizona. The neighborhood identified that they had a problem with hunger, and they needed to address the issue of hunger in the neighborhood. So the neighborhood said, what can we do with what we already have? looking at all these assets, and they identified that they live in Mesa, Arizona, which is outside of Phoenix, so it has great weather year-round, so a community garden would be a good solution. So they decided to start a community garden. They had an institution, an agency in their neighborhood, which was the local detox center, where the police took the drunks instead of to jail. The neighborhood didn't need that service. What they needed was that agency's vacant lot, which was a nice size for a community garden. In addition, it had an irrigation ditch in it, so they could irrigate the garden, the neighborhood garden, for almost nothing. So they had that, and then they had a number of businesses in the neighborhood that were willing to donate some seeds and tools so they could start the garden, some of the associations that became involved, and then finally they had people in the neighborhood that knew how to garden. And in fact, this was, in this neighborhood, this was the first activity that brought out the Hispanic males in the neighborhood to get involved, because they had a passion, which is very important, a passion for gardening, and so they got involved in this garden. So they were able to start a community garden in this neighborhood. And just to tell you a side story that's really important and reinforces this work of why we say everyone has gifts. There was a gentleman in the neighborhood, John, that was labeled as the homeless guy in the neighborhood. He slept in the alleys and just was the stranger, if you will. And we tell kids, stranger danger, stay away from John. So John was really ostracized, away from the neighborhood, even though he wanted to be part of the neighborhood and actually lived in the alleys. But when they built the community garden, he got closer and closer. And finally one day got close enough, somebody said, "John, get away, there's kids here, get away." And John said, "No, no, no, I'm a third-generation farmer. I grew up on farms. I know how to farm. So if you just turned those rows and turned them 90 degrees the other way, you could actually triple the amount of vegetables you could grow in this community garden." So John very quickly moved from being the stranger in the neighborhood to the master gardener for this neighborhood. And I was there one day, and Home Depot had donated a tractor and a trailer, and he was driving down the street with a bunch of kids in the trailer. So that shows you the kind of things you can do as you begin to unlock resources and gifts in a neighborhood. So the 5 types of assets are the individual talents and skills, local associations, the local institutions, the environment, and economic strengths. How can we bring all of those together to address all of the issues that a neighborhood or a community has? So now I'm going to give you an idea of how would we begin to do this. What are some ways that we could do this work? And partly, again, because effective communities look inside first to solve problems. Relationships are seen as power. They have a good sense of their assets and capacity, not just their needs. Leaders open doors, citizens are involved, and people take responsibility. So how do you engage people? The simple truth is everyone has something to contribute, their gifts, and everyone has something they care about, their passions. So therefore, to get people involved, you ask them to get involved around their passion. One of the things we typically do, and I spent a lot of years doing this myself as a United Way United Way professional, is that we would try to recruit volunteers to get involved to do our to-do list. And then we spent all our time trying to figure out how do we motivate them to get them to do anything. Instead of asking them first what they care about, what are their passions, because when you find people that care about kids, families, seniors, education, income and health, dogs, whatever that is, and create opportunity and space for them to do something, they will typically do something and begin to share their gifts if you honor their passions. So how do we do that? We start with a process of a community engagement, which starts with identifying everyone's gifts and passions, find out a way to connect, build relationships so we can identify the gifts and the passions of people. Once we have those identified, then we ask people to get involved. The second part of that is ask them to share their gifts around their passion, and then to create even stronger action, we connect people with the same passion to act collectively. So we find the 3 people that in the neighborhood that care about kids and reading and ask them to do the book drive. We don't find the person that cares about seniors and ask them to do the book drive. We find the people that care about kids and reading and connect them collectively to work together. So asset mapping has from my perspective, a number of key steps. The first one is to create a resident leadership team. People need to be involved. We don't do this from the outside looking in. So we need to create a resident leadership team. So find those people that typically that want to get involved, want to improve their community, want to improve their neighborhood, get them involved, And one of the other things you need to do is I recommend, as part of needs assessments or part of our evaluation, is never measure the success of an effort by how many people come to a meeting or show up at a meeting, because all you're measuring are people that have a passion to go to meetings. If we think about it, we'll all know the same people show up to meetings. So what you have to do, the resident leadership team, you have to look for people that have a passion to improve their neighborhood or their community, and people that have a passion, and they also have a passion for going to meetings, because they do need to meet. But many other people in the neighborhood can share their gifts, and they'll never ever have to go to a meeting. And then the second part is to select the geographic area for action. So I'm going to give you, actually, this is an example from some work I did in South Phoenix. So we brought together the resident leadership team, and then we asked them, what area of the community do you want to start with? It can grow and evolve later, but what area do you want to be responsible for today? Is it the whole city, or is it a portion of the neighborhood? So in the case of South Phoenix, and this was an issue actually that was this example is driven by the Maricopa County Health Department, that knew they had an issue around, again, from needs assessments. They knew they had an issue of infant mortality disparity between African American and white babies. In South Phoenix, more African American babies were dying than white babies. They knew they had enough services and clinics down there in South Phoenix, so they knew the issue was not about more services. The issue was about community and community engagement. So they decided to use this effort. So they went to South Phoenix, started talking at the associations, the churches, and other places, and identified the resident leadership team. From that, we brought the resident leadership team together, and at the first meeting we asked them, what is the area you want to be responsible for? Where do you want to start the process? So they picked their area, which is literally from Central to 19th and from Southern to Baseline. They said, that's the neighborhood we want to start with, so that's where we'll start. The second part of that then is to draw the first asset map. How do we begin to draw the asset map? So we literally got a big map, put it on the wall, big piece of paper, and began to draw this area with the streets and all. And then I asked people to begin to map the assets in the neighborhood. And typically what happens when we do that is that they begin to identify the institutional assets. So here's an agency up here, here's an agency on this street, here's a church on this street, here's a store on this street, here's a school on this street, here's another agency, here's the local SNAP office or the food stamp office, here's another school, here's another store, here's another church, and here's another church, and here's another agency. So typically during the first asset map, people do a great job of mapping all of those assets. So this goes back to the question that the individual from New York asked. I think it's important to begin to do this asset map and begin to take a look at your neighborhood or your community and put it on the wall and take a visual look at it. And typically when we start this is how it starts, with just the agencies being blocked and the institutions there. And so what is missing is the residents. Now we need to look at the second asset map, which is how do we begin to identify the gifts of the residents and map those as well. So what we went through in Phoenix in the process of asset mapping is that the resident leadership team created a questionnaire that they could use to go find out what gifts people had in the neighborhood, what their passions were, and how they were willing to get involved. So they created this questionnaire which asked, what are your gifts? What do you care about? What associations do you belong to? And who else in the neighborhood would you be willing to interview? So they created this questionnaire, and they were just ready to jump out now as the resident leadership team and go interview people in the neighborhood. And all of a sudden they said, wait a minute, we don't want to go interview people we don't know, because we're afraid. We don't know these people. And most of the resident leadership team were older women. And they said, we don't want to go knock on doors of people we don't know. And what I suggest is that's absolutely right. You never want to interview someone you don't know, because you're not sure the information you're going to get. You can't really move to the next level of engagement. So one of the rules of an asset map is never interview someone you don't know. So what they did is developed a process where it started with the 5 women or the 5 folks on the resident leadership team. They all each agreed to go interview 5 of their friends that live in the neighborhood, in the targeted area, and then ask those 5 people to go interview 5 of their friends. So literally within a couple weeks we had more than 100 surveys completed, and nobody had to interview anybody they didn't know. And we had good information now that we could begin to map because we had the addresses, we had what gifts they had, and we had their passions. So the next phase of the process is to begin to map so that we can create action the people and their gifts. So how do you do that? I recommend that the easiest way is to group and map by people's passions. So what you can do is use those wonderful inventions of the colored sticky dots. Some of you have probably seen those before. So we decided that in this case, the surveys really highlighted into 4 different categories. People that cared about children and youth, people that had a passion for seniors. There were some people that cared about the issue of hunger and food, and another group of people that cared about crime and safety. So we used red dots for the people that cared about children and youth, yellow dots for the people that cared about seniors, green, and blue. So now we went back to that same map, and we began to add the residents. So here are all the people that cared about the different things. So now we have a map with not only the institutional assets, but a map of the people in the neighborhood and what they cared about. And so now we could look at some natural groupings. These 3 people cared about the same thing around health, around crime. Let's get them together, introduce them to each other based on their passion, and ask them to do things. Another grouping over here we could start. So now you have an asset map that can become an actual plan for driving action, because you can see where people live, you can make connections. You can also make connections. These 3 people live next to this agency. Let's see if we can connect that agency into this. So you have now something to work with. The other thing you may notice that over here in this area, there are we don't have anybody mapped. So we may need to think, okay, we need to try a strategy to see if we can ask all the people we have interviewed, do you know anybody that lives on any of these streets? So we can begin to map this part of the neighborhood where we're missing some people. But again, never having to interview anybody or talk to anybody you don't know. But as you remember, we talked about this is important to build relationships, so also trying to strengthen and build this whole process through relationships. So through this effort, literally they created a whole host of activities going on in South Phoenix now, from a community garden to a block watch program to a variety of other activities that were created just by following these 6 steps to create an asset map. And I do want to highlight, jumping back real quick, that the last step in the process, I apologize, is to celebrate. So make sure you take the time to celebrate the activities and the successes to get more people excited so that you can grow. So again, create a resident leadership team, involve the residents, select the geographic area. They can grow it later, get them some sense of success first, and then grow that area. But the other thing, if you're going to get people to share their gifts, if they have to get in a car and drive a half an hour or an hour to share their gift, they're not as apt to do that as if they just have to walk out their door and walk next door or walk 3 blocks away. So that's why place matters and neighborhoods matter so much. Draw the first asset map, develop a way to identify the individuals, do the second asset map, and then connect people to act collectively and celebrate. So again, that's walking through this again. So to help do this, there's a different role I believe that institutions need to play across this country and in our communities. So we have to look again as whether we're United Way or one of the agencies we fund or a foundation in the agencies we fund. I believe there is a new role for institutions. And it's more than just providing services. It's really to look at how can we also remove barriers so that people have an opportunity to share their gifts and become involved in their community. So one of the things that we have to think about is that institutions should lead by stepping back to create space for citizen and neighborhood action. So how can we lead by stepping back? And to do that, there are 5 strategic questions. The first one is, what functions could the neighborhood people perform by themselves? As I highlighted earlier, the story of the book drive. People can do that themselves. So being very purposeful about what are those things that we're now doing that we could stop doing and people could do themselves, because they really have the ability to do that. They don't need our help. There are also other things, though, functions that neighborhoods can do with some help from us. So how can we become helpful? Maybe that is funding neighborhood organizing. Maybe that is funding or using our meeting rooms, maybe using our computers. What are the things that we can do to provide help so that we can do those things collectively? And what functions must institutions perform on their own? There are many services that agencies need to do themselves, whether that's a healthcare issue. If I break my leg, I don't want my neighbor setting my leg. If somebody needs to be detoxed, we don't want the neighbor doing that in the backyard. So there are many things that institutions must do. So let's be clear about that and focus on those things that only we can do, because we need to stop doing those things that people themselves can do so we can create space for that resident action. Because if we don't do that, we smother them with service and it doesn't create enough space for action. So how can we create that space for resident action? And what can we offer to the community beyond the services we deliver to support that resident action? Again, whether that's meeting rooms, whether that's watching the kids during the meeting, whether that's our computer, whether that's training, whatever that is. Each institution has a whole range of resources that they could offer beyond the services they deliver. In most cases, if you survey the gifts and the abilities of your staff, of your facilities and all of that, you'll identify that you actually have many more things to offer than just the services that you deliver. So the effective strategies start with the simple truth. Everyone has gifts. The belief that neighborhood and communities are built by focusing on those strengths. A place-based approach, starting one neighborhood at a time because it's easier to drive action and engagement that way. A belief that that the assets of a community's institutions can be identified and mobilized beyond just delivering services, and a range of approaches like asset mapping. So let me stop there again, and we've got a few minutes here, so I want to have, before we jump to the last section, so please, I'd love to hear any questions, comments, whether this has been helpful or not, and again, any stories that any of you have that we could really make this even a stronger presentation and webinar today.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, I work for a community foundation, and we are in a fairly rural area, so not a lot of small neighborhoods, that type of thing. There are a few towns, but mostly it's a much more rural area with farming communities and that kind of thing. Do you have any suggestions for communities that are built more along those lines as opposed to inner city type neighborhoods?
Yep, that's a great question. That's why I try to talk about neighborhoods and communities or towns, because it doesn't just work in inner cities or in cities. It also will work in towns and rural areas. And in fact, I think one of the lessons we've learned is that in some cases it's even more important to unlock the resources or the gifts of the residents in the rural areas, because there are less institutional resources. So it even becomes more important. So but the same sort of principles apply, is that neighbors need to know neighbors. They may need to drive or walk a little farther to get to their neighbors, but neighbors still need to know neighbors and create that opportunity for that. People in rural areas still care about something or care about some issues, and if you ask them to get involved around those issues, they will still get involved. So I think the key is you may need to use a little technology. The geographic area is certainly larger, but the same principles apply. And in fact, there is, if you email me, the ABCD Institute has put out a couple books on how to do this in rural areas and the importance of doing this in rural areas. So if you want to email me after the webinar, I'd be glad to connect you to those resources.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What is your name?
Christiana Shields.
All right. Very, very nice. Nice to meet you. Are there any other questions or comments? Let me just ask the general question, because I want to make sure this is helpful. So are people on the webinar finding this helpful?
Hi, I think it's been very helpful.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. I hope you all aren't, I hope you're just being quiet as we go through this. So let's just go ahead and move forward and talk about a couple things. One of the things you can do is use technology, use online databases, whatever that may be, to actually do the questionnaire or track that information, so you can find out the people that care about kids, families, seniors, what they care about and what they have to contribute. Because if you can create a database, whether that's online or however you do that, you really have the ability to use that information. And so if you need to find all the people that care about seniors, it's easy to do that. One of the initiatives that we were involved in Tucson, when I was with the United Way in Tucson, was something called the Neighbors Care Alliance. And part of our goal was to make sure that every neighborhood in our community and every congregation had a specific process to identify the seniors living alone and a way to engage the people in the neighborhood that cared about seniors, that could help care for them by providing care, by checking on them, by bringing them a meal, by driving them to the doctor, to the store, whatever that may be. Because in Tucson, we had a lot of folks, as you know, as you can imagine, that retired to Tucson. And what they found when they retired is that one of the couple would die, and all of a sudden we'd be left with somebody with a spouse living alone. And if they didn't have a community of care, because in many cases their community of care was back in Peoria, Illinois, where they moved from, so we needed to create that community of care in the neighborhoods and the congregations. So we had a specific process to do that, because in every neighborhood there are plenty of people that will help care for seniors if you just ask them and get them involved. So we were doing that, and we used technology to help track that and make sure that we were able to do that. So that's important to do that. You also have to have the ability to look at, are you making a difference? Are we tracking what we're doing in a community? So you need to look at community-wide data as well. Things like from, if you're focused on education and graduation rates, you need to be able to look at that data and have that data available so you can see if you are making a difference as you move through. And you also need the ability to collect data at individual agency or program level so that you can track that. So one of the things that a funder needs is the ability to track information at the community level as well as around every strategy, whether that's agency driven or neighborhood or community driven. And so using technology can certainly help you do that as you move forward. So let me stop again now and open it up for any final questions. The woman from New York, let me make sure, did I address your question to an extent?
Hello.
Yes. Are there any other questions or comments or thoughts?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. This is Betty Alonso at the Miami Foundation, and I am actually also the chair of Grassroots Grantmakers, which has worked very closely with the ABC, and many of our members use ABCD as part of our work in communities.
Yes, Janice is a good friend of mine.
Yes. So I want to say thank you, because this is wonderful. Clearly, we are full. We have seen this in action in many places. So for those who are sitting on the call, I do want to say that there are places where you can actually go see this working and really making differences in communities. And I'll talk about an example that for us, which has been work that I've been involved with at a specific neighborhood through a community partnership that was not working initially. It was very much provider driven, and it was not until we invited the residents in and we really started to work from the ground up that we started to see that community partnership come together. And today, and I'd be happy to share experiences. I don't want to take over this call with that, but for anybody else who is interested, I'd be happy to share that with you all. And one of the first things that we did was a community mapping. So my question to you is, once we've done that and we had residents start to get engaged in the work, part of the challenge that we have come now, and we need to do an update on the community mapping, it's been a couple of years now, has been when they want to take on larger work. So now we have infused residents, which is what we wanted, working side by side with providers and institutions, because exactly what you said, there are roles for each player. But now as the work gets a little bit bigger or deeper and gets more, how do we go to that next level? And do you have examples for that, or suggestions or resources that you could share for us?
That's a great example, and you're absolutely right. Is how you move to bigger issues, bigger projects, is by building on your successes of smaller ones, because people then learn new skills. They're able to expand their skills. The other thing they may be able to do then is partner with some institutions in new ways, just as they are partnering with you, because rather than coming to the institution with solve my problem and I need this, give this to me, the neighborhood can come together and say, look, this is what we've come together, this is our issue, this is what we're bringing to the table. Institution, we'd like you to partner with us because we need a specific thing. And just to give you a quick story, an example of that, working again in Mesa, Arizona, the same neighborhood that did the community garden. They decided they wanted a neighborhood center. After they'd done a lot of little projects, they decided they needed a neighborhood center because Bev got tired of all the after-school programs and everything else going on in her backyard and in her house and her bathroom. So they decided they wanted a neighborhood center. So the typical model would be go to the city and tell, or the county, and say, build us a neighborhood center, and the city would say no. So they found within their relationships an architect to design it for free, a contractor that agreed to design it or to build it for free by working with his subs. I was at the United Way at the time, and they came to us and said, would you give us just a little bit of money so we can open the doors, basically for utilities and insurance? And we said we'd be glad to do that. Then they went to the city and said, city, we'd like you to use your resource of CDBG, Community Development Block Grant money, and buy the land where we want to put the neighborhood center and lease it back to the neighborhood for $1 a year so we can build our neighborhood center. So in that model, the city could not say no. So this neighborhood now has a beautiful, wonderful neighborhood center that they were able to build themselves as a large project. Now they have the ability to bring in health clinics and a whole host of other things, but it's still all based on the model of people sharing their own gifts and being part of the solution.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
All right. Well, I want to thank you all then, but don't hang up yet because I've got a couple other things. First of all, when you do get off the webinar, you will have an opportunity to fill out a survey. So please do that, particularly because I need to know if there are any new topics that you want me to address or comments to improve these webinars. So please take the time to fill out the questionnaire when you leave the webinar. In addition, I'm going to be doing 2 other webinars next month about our software. So if you're interested, you're intrigued, you want to know more about our software, again, this webinar was not a sales webinar. We do a whole host of educational webinars, but we also offer webinars about our grant management and outcomes tracking software. So if you'd like to sign up for one of those, you'll have that information as well. And if you want to contact me again, you'll have the contact information if you want to ask any other questions. So I really want to thank you all for joining me today and the comments that were made. It was hopefully you all found it helpful. I'll look forward to hearing your comments on the questionnaire. So thank you all very much for joining us today, and have a great day and the great rest of your week and a weekend. And thank you very much for taking time to kind of talk about this important topic. So everyone have a great day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye. Thank you.